Welcome back, fellow geeks. Now, if you are a subscriber to the monthly 3D print subscription box of MakerBox, then you remember back to the August box when they sent out the Beaver3d Silk. And now, today I'm going to show you some of the wonderful results in a special project I did with the sample that they sent out. Stay tuned to find out. Now, if you remember back to the MakerBox you received in September, the August subscription, you remember seeing a very highly reflective green filament in there, and that was the Beaver3d Silk. Now, this is a project I kept on pushing off and actually ran a couple prototypes in Color Fab Engine from a workshop I held about Color Fab in the past. And so to get this thing going, I actually purchased a slim wallet off of Amazon for about 15 bucks. Then once I received it, I used engineer calipers and found all of my dimensions off of it. And then I drew out my model in Rhino. Now, I can go in depth on how I modeled this in Rhino, but it's fairly simple as it's a basic rectangle with text I put in the top to spell out my name. And Rhino is fairly complex, so I'm not going to bog down this and give you the details. Maybe a video I do later on. But then I converted the NURBS model into a mesh and then exported it as an STL file so I could print it. And then once I export out of Rhino, I then import it into Simplify 3D, where I then put in all of my settings. Now, I typically use the settings based off of what MakerBox recommends on each pack. I found it's a really good starting point, and in this case it was fairly good. Now for this, I printed this on my Robo 3D R1 Plus with a E3D hot end and a 0.4mm nozzle. Now, I used a 1.02 extrusion multiplier. It's just something I play around with, and I actually found worked fairly well with this filament. Now, this was printed at 150 micron layers. So for that I used four top layers, 4 bottom, and 3 outline, as this is a fairly simple print, so there wasn't going to be much problems, and with a slight over extrusion, it kind of took care of the problems that come up with a smaller micron layer of 150. So I used this to have a fairly safe model. Now, I didn't use any additions. I didn't use any skirts, any brims, or a raft. There's no need to. I didn't use any supports, as there's no overhangs in this. But for my infill, I used 35%. Now, I did this for a couple reasons. One, because this wasn't a very large sample. And two, I didn't want this to be too thin to where it snaps in my pocket and consequently breaks my cards. And I didn't want this to be too thick to where the corners end up poking me. You don't want an uncomfortable wallet. Now, for the temperature settings, I used 210 degrees Celsius on the hot end. And I used 45 degrees Celsius on the print bed. Now, being the Robo 3D, it is a heated bed and it is a glass bed. So I used a glue stick, just the standard Elmer's purple glue, school glue stick, to make sure my prints stuck well. And I didn't clean off all the glue from the first side, from the first print I did. So the second print actually stuck very well and caused a little bit of problems. But in the flex of pulling it off, I didn't have any damage to the actual model. So it kind of stands for how flexible this filament really is. And it's something you like to see, especially something you plan on sitting on every day. Now, for cooling, this is kind of a base of where I start, and I didn't find any reason to have to venture outside of it. I ran 0 speed on my first layer on the cooling fan, and 100% from the second layer on. I find it works fairly well with PLA based filaments, so it's kind of a base I stick with. And that could always be adjusted up and down depending on your prints or filaments. Now, I found no reason to alter the G-code, and again, no reason to alter the scripts. So then on my other tab here, my print speed was 40 millimeters a second. Now, being a fairly flat model and a very basic geometry, there's no problems with a faster print with 150 microns. So this is really simple setting to define. You might want to slow it down a little bit if you go for a taller, more elegant model, but for a simple rectangle, 40 millimeters per second was perfectly fine. I think it came out in about 45 minutes. Now, as you can see here, I have my outline under speed, my solid fill under speed, and the other settings. Now, I didn't really play with the retraction, distance, or setting, or even speed. This is just a base setting that comes with Simplify. Didn't have any problems with it, so I really didn't mess with it. Now, as you can see here are my actual prints and the results I had. I've used this wallet for about 2 weeks now, and it's actually held up very well. And there haven't been any problems with cracking or really anything. It's quite flexible. I've not exactly tried to break it, but it's in my back pocket and it's been sat on quite a few times. And it still has that really nice, highly reflective finish that it does in its little spool form. So it's nice to see that the print process, the heat treating, and everything else that happens to it while printing didn't affect the natural finish to it. Now, if you've enjoyed this video, please feel free to like and subscribe. If you have any comments or suggestions, again, feel free to comment below. If you have any questions about anything you saw here or want to know more, feel free to comment or shoot me an email at chrisbrown@3dpgeek.com. Now, if you have any suggestions for future videos, again, please feel free to comment, shoot me an email. Until next time, keep printing.